Hello and welcome to Destroy Before Listening, episode 8, which is a conversation between myself, Pete Byrne and John Hannon, who has been involved in various musical endeavours over the past 30 years. This began with UK straight edge band Standoff, which morphed into Understand, who took a more serious musical approach, which resulted in their signing with a major label, probably making them the first UK hardcore band to take that step in the mid-90s. There are some great stories here, like recording with Don Fury in New York City, touring with bands like Jawbox and Helmet, and where they signed their major label deal. John also explains how he moved into making more experimental music with Woe in the early 2000s, and then the group Liberez, who released their last album in 2018 on Alter Records. Also discussed is his career as a recording engineer and owning his own No Studios near Southend. The track at the end is by Sterling, a noisy garage rock band he played guitar in, also in the mid-90s, who had a 7-inch of unearthed material released last year. Really enjoyed this chat, and as you can tell, this is just scratching the surface. There is another podcast he was on called Then and Now about the Essex hardcore scene, where he talks specifically about Understand, which I'd recommend to anyone interested, so enjoy. Please subscribe and share this to anyone who may be interested, and follow on Instagram at Destroy Before Listening. Thanks. To start at the beginning of doing bands and your involvement with bands, that would be Standoff, would it? Was that more of a kind of a hardcore band, straight edge hardcore band?
Oh right, okay. We're going back to the
we're going way back.
Back.
Just because it segues in, because it's like a tie to the northeast, really, isn't it? Like up here, you kind of.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we went to Durham and it was Understand. That was the first band. We started that when we were at school, and the Standoff thing was basically the same, collection of friends, and it was just one of my best friends at the time. But that band had already been going for about maybe at least a year, I think, before Rob and myself from Understand sort of helped out, and that's when we went and did a string of gigs. But it was really kind of like a project rather, that Understand at that age was what we lived and breathed on a daily basis, if you like.
Yeah. So it was the two groups sort of morphed into each other, or was it both hardcore?
Yeah, you know what it's like. We grew up in a small town. There was a collection of about 10, 15 people who got into this thing, this American hardcore thing.
Yeah.
And those of us that could manage to get hold of an instrument and even, play a couple of chords, tried to do as much with that as we could. And then there were the people that were kind of very supportive and got involved in other ways, but couldn't quite get the music together. So there was Understand. We got this thing together, Standoff. But I mean, the village we're from is it's a pretty small place there, and we're talking about a sort of 2 to 3 year age range of people as well. So it's a small collection of enthusiastic people over a short period of time, and we sort of managed to do quite a lot with it.
So is it just like a specific area that there was just a bunch of kids who were kind of influenced each other or influencing in each other's tastes or whatever?
Yeah, there was a few key people, so Rob Coleman, who's in both of those bands, is incredibly influential person. He's charismatic, and at that age was just had this massive drive to make music, really, and but also the whole culture and the tribal aspect of it. And also he was a great before that, the digital age of sort of communicating the way we do today, he was a great networker in the old sense of like letter writing, phone calls, that kind of thing. Just very personable as well. And so he was very instrumental. And then and Dominic, the singer in Understand. But yeah, I don't know, what happens. These little youth cultures crop up, and we thought we were kind of unique, and then quickly you realize, oh no, there's people doing exactly the same thing as this all over the place in all different little pockets, and you sort of create those connections.
Yeah, so that's what you did. Well, coming up to the northeast and like finding a kinship or whatever with like the bands and people from the scene, the hardcore scene up here.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back, I mean, that's just it. I'm not sure. It shows you how small things were, because someone like Ian Leck, like, I'm not sure how interested he would have been in kids like us. It was just that there was so few people doing it, and I think because of Steadfast, there was like one of the first UK straight edge bands. I think that's how we found out about all that stuff. Oh no, actually no, I do remember. We met Lecky and Tony Levers at Gorilla Biscuit show. They got into altercation with back then. There was, it seems even insane to think about it, but there was this sort of, I don't know how real it was, this sort of rivalry between, I guess, what would be the slightly older set of people who'd come up through grindcore and crusty punk, and then the sort of younger, sort of more.
Is this the Northern Wolf Pack?
Yeah, all that nonsense.
Yeah.
So
I don't know a great deal, but I remember that was a thing, wasn't it? Like the straight edge, the kids.
Yeah, and there were these stories of glorified acts of violence and whatever. I think we were never really interested in that, but it was just the folklore of it, and it seemed to sort of, there's this sort of connection, isn't there, between the sort of physicality of that music, and some of the people I know from New York that kind of encountered those people were like, whoa, these kids are pretty nuts. So yeah, I think we thought it was all sort of quite interesting. I can't remember how we got invited to go and play in Durham or Middlesbrough or any of those places, but it's a long time ago. But yeah, it was we got on really well with Lecky and Sean, and they were very that was the early days of learning how people were hospitable and invite you somewhere and organise things, and you're like, why are they doing this? Nobody knows us, but you realise, oh no, this is a relay baton that's been, you're on the receiving end, and now it's next time it'd be your turn to sort of reciprocate and host someone else or go out of your way to make something happen.
Yeah, well, Understand would have come up to play at the 1 in 12 club as well, which was a hub of the UK hardcore, the UK scene or whatever.
Yeah, going to the 1 in 12. We'd been going to gigs in London and trying to sort of put the pieces together. You'd see the odd person selling Class War, or there'd be like Hunt Sab like stuff. We didn't really, we're still really young. We're still putting the pieces together. We didn't really know the politics behind a lot of things. I think a lot of us were vegetarian at that point, but I don't know how we kind of got into that. But it's just that, comedic combination of personalities at that age. Our bass player wasn't remotely interested in any of the kind of extra traits, shall we say, of like the hardcore scene. He was just wanted to make music. And I think we walked into the 1 in 12 and he had a big bag of like McDonald's with him. And there was that, I don't know if it's still there, the mural of like Ronald McDonald with like a dagger through him or something. I and we're like, no, you can't do that. And it's like the scene from The Inbetweeners or something. Yeah, just always putting our foot in it, getting things wrong. I remember this hilarious story to do with, not sure if it actually this, sometimes you wonder, did this actually happen, or is this something that I was told? But straight edge person getting a bit annoyed with Lecky because he bought a cider lolly from from an ice cream van, and it was debating whether that was kosher or not in the straight edge world, so
the politics.
Yeah. So
politics.
I mean, I think we saw, even at that age, we saw the humor in lots of these, sort of nuanced takes on what this was all about. Many of these, sort of great ideas, or like well-intentioned ideas, are usually very simplistic to start off with, and it's when people sort of go, oh, it's about this and it's about that, and I'm sure nobody knows. Just look at any sort of political ideology or religion or something. That's how these things happen, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So what year was Understand fully underway or fully formed?
I think we were calling ourselves Understand by 1990, 1991.
Right.
But, obviously when you're younger, your whole world is moving at a much slower rate as far as your lifetime experience goes. So you get a bit murky as to, what was one summer feels like 4 years or something. But yeah, I think that's when with that group of people, with that name, with that intention. I mean, the music we were making, I hope stays buried for many, many years. But
Or did you do a demo?
I mean, we were always recording. Yeah, like there's a demo studio. I mean, it's probably like 30 miles away, but it seemed like local to us at the time. And we would go there, just save up some money. We were just in the cycle of, as soon as we had 6-7 songs, we'd go over to this studio called Adelaide and record. And I forget how many sessions we did, but we had quite a lot of recording experience years before we ever got near to making a record. And then the first record that we did with Armed with Anger, that was at that same studio. We'd been going there for some time at that point.
Yeah. So that's first 7-inch. Is that like 92, 93, something like that?
I think it's 1992. I mean, I think that's when we recorded it anyway. Maybe it was released the next year, I'm not sure. I think maybe it's recorded quite late in the year. But even so, I think the turnaround back then was pretty quick. I think someone said they were going to put your record out. You expected it to happen, not 2 years later.
Yeah. So you've done your first 7-inch. It's like a UK hardcore label. In the space of a year or so, you just like completely upped the game, with regard to the songwriting and the future of the band.
Yeah, but your learning curve at that age is far greater, isn't it? And I've been learning, the violin for like 10 years now, and I practice all the time, and it's quite depressing, how slow how much little information your brain can take in the older you get. But at that age, you're just improving almost on an hourly basis. And also outside of us, that I don't want to limit it to the hardcore thing. American influenced guitar music of the 1980s had come of age and suddenly exploded, didn't it? And so from the time when the possibilities that seemed available when we got into it in the early 90s, by 1993, 94, post the explosion of Nirvana and Rage Against the Machine and these enormous bands, suddenly the whole game changed, didn't it? Suddenly a band that would at best be playing a 150 capacity venue in London were playing, I don't even want to speculate, but they were some of the biggest bands in the world. So the opportunities changed, and we were just in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Well, I got the board game 7-inch at the time, and that was on a major over here, wasn't it? But it was on like Equal Vision in America. So what was the division, or why was
what between those two things?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much attention I really paid, but I do know that when we went to New York and made that record, we were. I mean, I would love to, be a fly on the wall now and look back at that. But we got to meet a lot of people in the music scene just purely because we were a bunch of English kids, and I can't sort of overstate how much that seemed to be a bit of a novelty. That we were English, we were in New York, and we were part of this, because that stuff was the music we were making at that point, good or bad, was kind of evolving at that point as well. So it was a living, breathing, happening thing at that time. And I guess it was a sort of mostly American centered thing. So there was a novelty that we were a UK band, and and it's undeniable that lots of we were emulating these American bands who, for them, a big influence was much of what had happened in the UK and sort of post punk and the indie scene and everything from like Gang of Four to the Smiths, or that they thought that stuff was really cool. So anyway, what I'm saying is, being English, we had extra cachet, so we met a lot of people. And in New York at that time, the that Krishna thing was happening, and so we hung out with Rob Fish from Resurrection, and we went to, I can't even remember, the Equal Vision kind of house. It was like a loft somewhere in, I'm not even going to try and remember that.
Yeah.
All these kind of Krishna hardcore kids hanging out. And I'd had no real sort of interest in Krishna consciousness whatsoever. I mean, I liked the idea that it was this sort of, just at its root, there was this idea of stripping away the unnecessary sort of nonsense in life, and just focusing on what you want to do, and of not putting too much importance on materialistic things, just basic stuff that I guess most people would agree with. As to how far you wanted to go with that, there was a lot of, when you went to IshCon and places in the UK, that there was a lot of damaged people who had come to those conclusions through sort of trauma in their past. In America, it felt much more kind of hip, and these kids it was nowhere near as intense as what was expected of some of the devotees in the UK. Anyway, so we started hanging out. So we one or two trips we went over there, we were hanging out with the people from that label. And I think Rob, who I mentioned earlier, being the charismatic person he was, he would just, it didn't matter what level you were on or who you were talking to or how important they were. When I'm talking about like the sort of more major label people, he could just see through the bullshit straight away and just think, well, this guy's got acting like he knows what he's doing, but he clearly doesn't, or we've missed this opportunity because someone, didn't see it. So I think he just organized that. He just went, do you want to put this record out? Then went back to the UK and told them, oh, that's what we're going to do. I think there was a bit of a guffaw, like, oh, why, you're on a major label, we're not going to do that. And then it just happened anyway. I think. I mean, right. I don't know, but I think that's what happened.
Okay. I was going to ask as well, because I'm kind of interested in, the recordings or the recording side, and it's like Don Fury that you recorded with, or recorded that EP with, and just that experience, because like his drum sounds just like, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Really, the kind of the presence of it, the instruments and stuff.
Yeah. So at that time, Don Fury's studio was on Spring Street, right in the heart of Little Italy, and he lived above, and it was in the basement. So, I mean, I suppose in Manhattan at that time, you could still do that. You could still afford to live somewhere and rent. There were still parts of the Lower East Side which were, no-go areas for tourists. And I think things obviously radically changed by, even within a couple of years of that. So yeah, if you ask the other guys in the band, they'll tell you a very, very different story. But I really valued working with Don Fury, and it kind of reinforced my idea of what a recording studio could be, or what you didn't need to have to be able to make a great record. So like I said, we'd gone to this small little place that we used to record all our stuff, and then later on, we kind of ventured to bigger studios and got results which we weren't as happy with. So you have to think, well, why is that? Like they've got all the gear, this place is amazing, but we were happier with the result we got in this tiny little 16-track studio, that's local to us. And so Don Fury had, again, very, very little equipment back then. I think he was running 2 ADAT machines, tiny little recording room, and the drums funny enough were, you could only, I don't even think you could bring your own stuff in. I'm not sure there was enough room to actually get a drum kit through the door.
Okay.
And he had a drum kit set up in the corner, and it had like it looked like something out of Star Trek. It had this sort of cylindrical perspex that went round it, but there was only a couple of inches to spare, like between the perspex and the cymbal stand. So like tiny little drum
That must be
booth,
the secret.
yeah, I guess
That
so.
must be the secret. It
And
must be.
I mean, I don't like the record we made there at all, but undeniably he made some great records there, and I really liked him. And actually, when we went back to New York other times when we weren't recording, hung out with him a couple of times, and he had some pretty wild stories about some of the kind of people he'd worked with, like Gigi Allen and Swans rehearsing in his basement, and stuff like that. So interesting person.
Yeah, I possibly like overlooked, because say if you were to think about now with what you know, would you have who would you have chosen, or would you have chosen differently if you'd gone to New York to do a record, or America to do a record?
I think, I've talked about this many times. When we were asked about who did we want to work with, we didn't really understand what the question was. Like, we just thought, what do you mean? Like, you just go to a studio, don't you, and make a record? We didn't. The idea of we want to work with this guy or this person was completely alien to us. So it was actually the reason we went there. The guy that signed us to the label, I think it was this band called Orange 9mm, which had just released an EP, and he'd heard it, and because they're a major record label, they say things like, "Oh, let's go and do it with this guy," and we're like, "He's in New York," and they're like, "Yeah," and we're like, oh, "Okay." So I don't know how much thought went into it. I think he said that, we said yes. I mean, we did actually know the name Don Fury because his name was on pretty much all hardcore records, him or Walking Tears, out of New York. And then, if he'd said Don and Zientara, then we would have been over the moon as well. But I mean, we would have just done what we were told, I think, really. Like, I think that's actually the reality of it regarding that, because we didn't know. If it was something that we had a strong, opinion about, I think we would have been quite sort of like pig-headed about it. But if it was something that we didn't really know, then we were sort of quite happy just to sort of be told and do, and go where we were told.
Yeah. So with regard to your deal with a major label, I mean, how did that transpire? What were the events?
What were the events?
Sort of leading up to it, or like, how it happened? Because it's kind of unexpected, I suppose.
Yeah. And it was, like, you forget that was a thing back then, wasn't it? Like the ethics of, do you remain independent, or do you, like there was this, you don't cross that line. It was the big selling out argument. I mean, lots of those things, you have to even kind of remind yourself that it was even a conversation. And I think for the most part, it was one that you could sort of like wear that badge of honor, because it was unlikely, like Sony were going to come knocking on your door anyway. But they weirdly did happen with us. So the without getting too boring about it, what happened was we, through a weird scenario, ended up supporting Ned's Atomic Dustbin, which was, a bizarre thing in itself. Their manager at the time took an interest in the band. I think his background was that indie music that sort of that they came from, but he had an interest in sort of the stuff that we were emulating. He started managing us, and obviously, at that time, Ned's Atomic Dustbin were a band that people knew about, so he had a certain amount of clout. And then it's just someone like that on board. Suddenly, all these doors open that would never open. So he enabled this, and then the next thing you know, you're just being told, oh, someone from Polydor is coming to see you, or this, that, and the other. And there was a period of time where it seemed like we were choosing who we were going to sign with. I was I was very low down on the pecking order of stuff like that. So I just did what I was told. And I think also there was this slight skepticism that any of this would happen either, like it's like you kind of think, really, is anyone going to sign this band? I don't think so. It just feels like it's going through the motions. And that did go on for a while. And then someone called Nathan McGough, who was the Happy Mondays manager, he wasn't at that time. He'd left, he was kind of another name in his own right. He'd, if you know anything about the sort of Manchester scene, and, he was along with Tony Wilson, kind of like, a real important figure there. It meant absolutely nothing to me at that time. I had no idea who he was. He came to see us at a gig at the George Robey, not a place where most bands would get signed, and offered, I don't know what he said, but clearly our manager went, right, okay, that's what we're going to do. And then there was this, what seemed like a very long period of time where, we were meant to be signing with this label, but nothing was happening. And then signed with them. That's another slightly ridiculous rock star story where, so Nathan took us out to dinner, and he started talking about this place called Sealand. And
just to interrupt you there, this is what I had on my list here, because like this is a really I remember my friend first telling me about Sealand.
Oh, okay.
I was like, what the fuck, what? And then when I saw that this was the place where it was inked and that, I was like,
all right, okay.
So let's go, continue, sorry.
So this is the story. He started talking about Sealand, and we were exactly as you were. We're like, what on earth are you going on about? And he's like, Sealand, don't you know about Sealand? It's off the coast of Essex, And we're like, never heard of it. What? And it sounds made up, So he was, at that time, Nathan, I don't know if he was actually married to Lara or she was his girlfriend. One of the two. Lady Lara of Sealand was Nathan's girlfriend, and that's why he was so well versed on Sealand. So, and a lot of the stuff that came out of Nathan's mouth, I'd be like, "Is this true? What's he going?" There's all these ridiculous stories. So he said, "Yeah, it's this Second World War gun tower that." Is one of, I think, there's quite a few of them out there in the North Sea that was commandeered by this sort of ex-army, I don't know what he was, some high-ranking Roy of Sealand around the mid 1960s, and they commandeered this thing and claimed it as a principality, like sort of independent state, and there was. Because it's, I think, just outside of British territory. I don't know how, through international law, this has been tolerated and they've enabled, and so basically they like running their own country out there. I mean,
yeah, they got T-shirts.
Yeah, I mean, we went to this dinner. I'm sure we came away, all of us, just thinking, what was that bit where he's going on about that? But suddenly, that became the most important thing about us signing our record deal. I mean, none of us were remotely interested, and we were trying desperately. We were well aware that signing a major record deal was not cool, especially in the world what we came from. There were already bands that were refusing to play with us. I think Bob Tilton dropped out of a gig that we were meant to be playing with because we were on we were about to sign to a major label, and we were losing friends as such. And so if we were going to do it, we wanted to do it as pared down as we could, not sort of big lavish things like this. So I think we just were like, yeah, whatever, let's just sign it. But then suddenly what was holding it up was the weather conditions about getting to Sealand. And we're like, what? And so I can't remember when it actually happened. I think it was like in February or late January, because our manager, he clearly was all over this as well. He wanted to go to Sealand, so we had a helicopter that flew us from Southend Airport. Can't have taken very long because it's not that far. It's off the coast of Clacton, and I think there was a limited amount of research you could do as to what this place was, but I'd sort of imagine this almost kind of like North Sea oil rig or something, this huge structure
Yeah.
And then I can remember being in the helicopter and seeing it emerge and thinking, it's really, really weird, the perspective when you're out on above the sea, because that looks absolutely minuscule. And then
It's
as
a
we were
tower,
getting,
really, isn't it?
yeah, it's like you get close to it and you're like, oh, it's like a bungalow, on stilts in the, tiny. We're barely going to fit on the top of it. And so disembarked, met Prince Roy. I think the reason we've been allowed to do this was because they were doing a changeover, and Roy's son, they would do, I forget how long they would do at a time, but his son would change over, Roy would come back, or someone else in the family, and stay there, and someone had to man it all the time. I mean, I don't get what the point is, but I think it's still there, isn't it? Like I don't know.
Yeah. I know that they do a line in merch and everything. You get your Sealand t-shirt.
I mean, it was pretty grim, like if you imagine, you can't see land. So even, standing right on the top. So in February, right in the middle of the North Sea, it's like, those things, I think structures were only meant to last a matter of years. They weren't designed to be, people living on them 70 years later. There was massive holes where the steel or whatever it's made out of had kind of like corroded. And I mean, now, it's brilliant. It's a story, and there's lots of photographs as well of us on it. But at the time, we were like, "What? This isn't this isn't very punk rock, is it?" But
it is in retrospect now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Roy, he had that, I don't know, kind of against authority spirit, if you like,
Yeah. I was going to ask as well. Well, with the kind of distancing from the hardcore scene, you would be playing with bigger bands, also major labels and things. Did you play over here with Jawbox or did you tour with Jawbox when they played over here?
Yeah, so it was this, because we never got anywhere. Nobody ever knew really who Understand was, outside of people that would have known maybe about us had we remained on Armed with Anger. We never really crossed over to really a bigger audience at the time. So it's this really weird world of, 1 minute you're on tour with Therapy, and then the next night you're playing to just a normal pub gig or something with the kind of bands that you would have been playing with anyway. And, so we toured with bands that we liked, people like Jawbox, and then we toured with Clawfinger, and it was just this constant flitting from one world to the other. Jawbox were probably one of the sort of cooler bands that we toured with over, I forget how long that was, but it was like 2 weeks or something. The biggest tour we ever did was with Helmet through Europe. Yeah, that was really good. But again, along the way, we played with like Down by Law, and it's like, Helmet were going off and doing festivals, and so wherever they had like a festival day, we'd kind of like fill it with. In fact, I think the only gig Understand ever played that only one person came to, and I say there was nobody in the. I think even the sound guy had gone. There was no one, no bar staff. It was literally the band and a solitary person watching us. Was in Berlin on that tour. And I think, the night before we had probably been playing to like 800 people. And that was just kind of a good example of that. Just here's the fictitious world that you're inhabiting at the moment as a support band. And here's the reality of how many people come to see you when you play on your own. Weirdly, that solitary man is one of my best friends now. And he was living in Berlin at the time. And he saw on a flyer that we were from Southend, and that's where he was born. So that was the only reason he came to the gig, and I've stayed in contact with him ever since.
Southend.
Yeah.
This is well, your album. You've got. Well, it's not trying to put across that you're an American band. A few singles about Southend, is it really?
No, I mean, I think there's been a sort of bit of a rebranding of Southend over the last sort of 10, 15 years. You see it referenced sometimes, and it pops up on television, or there's been some larger bands that have come from Southend. I don't always wear it as a badge of honor. The Southend that we grew up in was this place no one knew or wanted to know, or it kind of just was just a nothingy kind of place. So I kind of understand why my friend David would have gone to see us, because just out of curiosity, when you come from a place like that, you just kind of you want to go, they're from where I'm from. I want to see what they've done.
What's the bigger bands that have come? Or
so the Horrors, that there's a couple of members of them are from Southend. Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly. You ever heard of him?
I've heard of that name. Yeah.
These New Puritans. Yeah, and then the whole sort of rebranding, if you like, of the whole Dr. Feelgood thing, and Wilco Johnson, and that's seen as a very positive, cool thing now. I mean, pub rock didn't really have a great rep in the early 90s. It was this washed up, horrible old man thing.
How far is Canvey Island away from Southend?
I mean, as the crow flies, no distance at all. You can see it, clearly. It's not the most connected place, with travel wise. You can't. There's no train station, so you have to get a bus there. So it can take a while to get there, but it's not far at all. I mean, you're probably quicker to walk, but yeah, it's, I don't know, 5 miles away, something like that.
Okay, well, yeah. So would you say the kind of demise of the band is based on?
Scott, just say it. I don't pull any punches.
Well,
I'm not sensitive at all.
No, is it just the age you're all at and the kind of enthusiasm for that life?
There's lots of things that happen, isn't there? Like this, 16, 17, 18, those were the years that this thing seemed limitless. When I say this thing, I mean the little world we discovered, the hardcore networking scene of people playing like-minded gigs and this music, and and we're sort of talking about here a specific thing, the bands that kind of played the 1 in 12 or that hardcore thing, but we had a much more expansive view on what that was, and liked all kinds of bands, but essentially who had similar principles. You by your sort of early mid-20s, you start to see these walls that you couldn't see when you were younger, that suddenly it feels like, oh no, if you want to be part of this club, you need to, it's more about what you don't do than what you do. You can't do that, you can't do this, can't do that. And then as soon as that starts to happen, I start to get a bit, I've never really liked being part of any club. So that was the only one I ever sort of voluntarily joined, if you like. And I still had a love for the music, but didn't really have a love for the music we were making. I think we'd just gone through that natural cycle that lots of bands do, and maybe had we just given it a break for 2 years or something, which would have been unthinkable, but quite normal thing to do, really. Maybe we could have come up with a different avenue to pursue, but we were all kind of just going off in different. And I had, by that time, I was at a bit of a crossroads with what I wanted to do. I knew that whole major label thing was just nonsense, and I'd sort of, the idea of the recording studio was only literally just starting to become even a feasible possibility. In fact, I couldn't have got into it had not a few really sort of fortunate things falling into place. Mm-hmm. But I definitely had the eye on that kind of prize. I started going to other bands' recording sessions, just to be there and try and pick something up. And it was something about not having control of that final process that I found unbearable. And that you're making a record, but you're not in control. It's this other person is, and I wanted to address that. And the other guys, I think they wanted to make a career out of something, and they did. They all got into like the other side of, they got into live music, and the sort of production of that. But yeah, it wasn't great. It was just a natural trajectory of any group of friends, just we come from this thing where you're kind of lumped together at school and you don't have any choice about hanging out with each other. And then we got to a point where, through the natural course of life, you all have slightly different, you're all slightly different people, aren't you? In your mid-20s as you are when you were like 14.
So it ends probably like, because there was meant to be a second album, but I guess that just didn't happen. And then you finished up by what, 98 or so?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. We made this, we did record this second album, which exists now. It's all mixed, it's finished. And I don't know what's happening with that. Like I'm not really, I couldn't really care either way. That was made. And it was, shortly after that I've said this before, it wasn't like anyone said, oh, split up, or there was an argument, or it just petered out. One day we weren't doing it, and that was it.
But then this is when you start recording like a lot of bands, isn't it? Or a lot more bands in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah,
so what happened was, we all needed to get a job, because we didn't have a record deal. And I just started working in a local cafe, but I was working like Monday to Friday, and my friend worked in a even smaller local recording studio, about 10 miles away from Southend. He'd been doing it a couple of years. It was basically a similar scenario around the country. There was a rehearsal studios, and one of them sort of doubled as a recording studio, and they kind of mostly just recorded the bands that rehearsed there, and most of them would have been covers bands, or just local rock bands. And he was actually a very gifted musician, and also much more gifted engineer than myself, but he couldn't do any more because his band was actually getting signed. He was in a band called Vitro, and I think they signed with Def America or something. So he knew he wasn't going to do it anymore, and he said, do you want to do it? Just, you'll become my replacement. I had no experience whatsoever of operating anything other than the sort of little 8-track machine we had. And he said, oh, look, don't worry. I'll just sit in with me, wing it. I'll show you the basics. You'll pick it up. And I just sat in on a few sessions that he did, and I really didn't know what I was doing for years. But just got thrown in at the deep end, and a lot of people paid the price probably for my inadequacy. So yeah, that was 1996. So I'd started doing that job before Understand had really kind of properly, ended. So the guy, but it was a weird setup where the person who actually owned the business didn't operate any of the equipment, or wasn't even interested in that. He was a divisive figure, and he kind of not everybody liked him, but he was actually very decent to me. And I worked for him for a couple of years, and I think he saw some potential in me sort of working as an engineer, not financially, because there was very little money in it, but just kind of put a little bit of money behind the business and sort of developed it a bit. And then it got to the point where he sort of got this sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and he was just kind of had it with the whole music thing at that point, and decided he wanted to do something else. So he said, why don't you buy the studio off me? And I was like, well, how much you pay me? Like, I can't, I just can't afford it. I mean, I didn't even know how much he was going to, say, but whatever the figure was, it was money that I definitely didn't have. Mm-hmm. And he just said, look, I'll make it so you can. And so I took out a loan and paid him half up front, and the other half he let me pay him back over the next couple of years, because he still retained there was 2 separate buildings, and he held the rehearsal building, carried on doing that, and I took over the other building, and paid him back. And but I kind of had the confidence to do it because by that late 90s, I'd made enough connections, really not on my engineering skills, but basically on if there was any legacy that Understand had left behind, wasn't really that we had any of these fans as such, but there were, I think, kids a bit younger than us that had come up and were now doing bands that maybe were influenced by the bands that we were influenced by, and and we'd gone somewhere with it. So what I'm saying is people wanted to come and record with me because they maybe thought I understood what they wanted to do, because I at some point listened to the same records they were listening to, rather than any particular great skill I had in being an engineer, But that's what you do when you're younger, like we weren't really listening to records and going, oh, I love the way this, kick drum sounds or something. We were just listening to the overall thing and just going, we like this band, they made it here, let's go and work with that guy. Whereas that guy might, been rubbish. But so there was a lot of, I knew that there was work out there, and I'd already sort of started to tap into that. So I sort of made a little bit of a leap of faith, took out this loan, took on the studio, and for the first couple of years I was really, really, really busy straight away. And just the nature of recording then was that things just took a lot longer, like just rewinding a tape, takes a certain amount of time, like overdubbing, and the whole process just took longer. So you needed less work to make up the same amount of hours. Sorry, this is probably quite boring. Just logistics of recording studios.
That's right.
But so I was working for labels like Household Name, a small label called Firefly. There was lots of ska punk and emo and stuff like that around at the time, and it all seemed to make sense as well. And that I enjoyed that, because the labels I was working for, they were releasing a lot of product on CD, and they were selling like thousands of CDs, so they would spend X amount of money to record it, and then they would make a return and a profit. And the bands were really hard working and were always touring or just sleeping on people's floors, but worked way harder than we ever did. And it was a thriving little sort of DIY community. I mean, musically, I wasn't so invested in the sounds they were making, but their commitment and how hard all of it, they worked way harder than we did. That was great. I'd say from sort of about 98 through to about 2003, 2004. It was just record after record after record. I don't really listen to any of those records. I probably wasn't the best man for the job, but I tried to work as hard as they did on those records.
What about, because you'd recorded like the early 100 Reasons stuff, didn't you? Because they went to kind of stardom, didn't they? Yeah,
so I had a little bit of a window there. So they were clearly, just a very together group of people. And
you did your thing, Understand, on the major label, and you were influenced by, obviously, Quicksand and Helmet and Fugazi stuff. And then it's probably like about maybe like not the right time when you did that, but when that band, I suppose, blew up, you would had like At the Drive-In and Trail of the Dead, and like I remember seeing the video there. The profile, it was more like videos on MTV2. I remember seeing them. Yeah, but just with it being like more of the climate is right for them doing that kind of like the post-hardcore. At the time they did it, and then you're obviously more experienced with recording or hearing that sort of sound.
Yeah, there definitely were when we sort of met them, and they're, I don't know, 6-7 years younger than it, maybe not that much. They're sort of like a little generation behind us. Yeah. There were lots of comparisons, and you'd be like, oh yeah, this kind of feels like what we were at this point. I mean, they had it together a bit more than we did, and obviously, and I mean, I don't know about that. About that, like, had we happened a couple of years later, it would have connected more. I don't know, but yeah, and I completely agree. Yeah, that definitely at the drive-in, even Colin's afro, was kind of, you're like, oh, it feels pretty close to this band that you're all really obsessed with. And they were managed by the same guy that managed Understand. Some of the people that really championed Understand were really behind them and part of their management team as well. And Larry Hibbett, like the guitarist, recorded with me. I think he probably saw someone like me and just went, wait a minute, I could do that, if not better. So, and now he's a very successful producer, so yeah, there were lots of similarities in the two things. I mean, I had a little window of opportunity in that I did their first couple of demos. They got signed, and then very charitably, like, the label said, oh, the guy that did the first EP, let's give him a shot. Let's put him in a proper studio and see what he can do. And I kind of choked, really. Like, so we did it at this place called West Side. I can't remember. There was an engineer there, and I kind of just had to say, look, I don't really know. I'm a bit out of my depth. And he kind of just took over because I'd asked him to. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of had my name in it, but I didn't really do anything. And consequently, had I been a bit more of a blagger in life, I could have maybe capitalized on that one chance. You don't really get another one. And I went back to my studio. They went on and had their career.
Yeah, well, that's good. It's just it's like the background and stuff, isn't it? The history of the timeline. Yeah, interesting. But I was going to ask, well, the transition to doing Whoa, which is the band of the first, so a bit half of the 2000s, which, it's a bit of a like left turn compared to understanding the sound or the why or how that came about, that direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, so Understand was a very much a band in that. I mean, there's definitely a hierarchy in many aspects of the way the thing operated, but creatively, we kind of developed this thing together. And so you're just 1/5 of this organism, and we were very democratic about how we did things as well. So I never really felt, there wasn't my music. Like, I was in a band, so, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do myself, but I became more and more aware that it wasn't that. But I did the idea of being able to control the whole thing, or right, even if you're playing with other people, like, actually run more of a less democratic structure, was becoming more and more appealing. The thing that I had a big revelation for me was, and it just sounds like so obvious now, but so when I mentioned earlier, Understand did this big tour with Helmet, and it was a real like sort of moment in my life, because I'd been diagnosed with something that was like a really serious condition, and we were sort of going, for me, I was going off for like one kind of last hurrah. I didn't really know what was going to happen at that point when I come back to the UK. I was going to have to go in the hospital for a very long time. Yeah. And so some of the people I met on that journey became very important to me, like the guy I mentioned earlier, like the one guy that came to see us in Berlin. Someone else I met in Austria was a almost identical age to me, just starting out as a filmmaker. And we sort of, well, I did really hit it off with him, and went off to stay with him in where he lived. And he, a couple of years later, won a scholarship onto the International Film School in London. So when he produced his first student film, he said, "Oh, look, I want you to do the music for it," which I'd never really thought of before, but, and I was like, oh yeah, they're great. So I didn't really know anything about scoring music to film or any of those things. So just followed my instinct. And actually Rob from Understand, him and I sort of did it together. But straight away I was like, okay. You don't, because the notion of writing a song or writing lyrics or structuring your, music always came quite easy to me, but this I had this barrier with this idea of like songwriting, which just felt completely fake and not a sort of the vehicle I wanted to express music, but that's all I knew, because all the music I'd grown up with via my parents or what I'd been exposed to as a teenager was, for one way or another, song structured, usually with a vocal. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't know what instrumental music was. That was just like imprinted on my brain. This is what you do. So to actually start making music that didn't adhere to this structure or have this kind of time frame or this narrative or this idea that the most, that the vocal is the focal point, was just like this complete revelation. And I was like, I can do this. I can just make music, and it can, it doesn't need to, follow any of these points. So, and also the inspiration, so you're looking at this image and you're like, I want to, it's a very different skill. I don't know if you've ever done it, tried to make music to, it's the sum of the two parts is much greater than you would imagine. And so sometimes you have to pare back things a lot more than you would initially, were you writing, not actually looking at what you're scoring for.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I can just make music like this. I can just look at a photograph, or I can just imagine something. And that was really, that was the turning point. I kind of thought what I wanted to express.
So is it more reacting to like an image or a moving image?
I mean, the things that interest me as are the parts of the human experience which you can't explain. I mean, I'm not a very gifted person with words. I find it hard to articulate lots of ideas I have, but not with music. Those little crevices of your psyche that you can't quite explain. They're the things that I'm trying to get across with music. And that all just suddenly happened, it kind of like this little bit sort of eureka moment. And so I suddenly felt incredibly purposeful and confident that I would be, no matter, we started taking on these instruments we couldn't even play, or I started playing the trumpet. I couldn't play the trumpet, but I was like, because I know what I want to do, like 100%, it doesn't matter, we'll get there. And also our lack of knowledge about recording doesn't matter either, because we're in control and we will just keep going till it's correct. And much more headstrong than I probably am now. Even though Understand was ending, I wasn't really, I had this new goal, and it was all encompassing, So that's how Woe started, yeah.
Yeah, well, because sonically it sort of transitions into the next thing that you do, Liberez. It's kind of like a similar. It just seems like you've got your idea, like you said, and it just like follows a through line in experimentation or
So I mean, people say, isn't it? I forget what the line is, but most artists have got like 2 or 3 ideas. They spend their whole life trying to express the same thing, just in various ways. So I mean, personally, whether it's Standoff, Understand, I can hear the same basic ideas in everything I've done, even though they've radically, on the surface, like the instrumentation or the sound or the pace is really different. I can hear the same sort of musical intervals in there that I sort of always sort of gravitate towards, or the certain sort of timings. So yeah, like I guess when we were doing Woe, it was really exciting because I was discovering sort of like free jazz and sort of like the early sort of like noise kind of elements, and it was another one of these moments in my life where it was just suddenly this whole world which was right in front of me and I'd never noticed before, and I was just like, I just need to hear this, I need to hear that. And we would go into all kinds of gigs all the time, and it felt really liberating because we weren't part of any scene at all. It was literally just wanted to just digest everything from Albert Eiler to Stockhausen to like just anything that was new. Have you heard this? Have you heard that? and just trying to sort of, sort of naive way, sort of take some of those ideas and filter it through. So I very much walked away from the idea of a vocal. That was the kind of, that was too, it was this musical element that limited what you could do. A bit like a drum beat as well. I kind of like started, I don't want drum beats anymore, because they're just, as soon as you start off with a drum beat, it's just like you close all these doors. We started calling ourselves Liberez like actually a long time before we actually released a record under that name, but it was a going back to the idea of a vocal and how powerful it can be. I was at that time wasn't worried about the idea of writing a song. Yeah, I wasn't as fearful about vocals, and I just saw all this potential again. And I'd met Nina, and who was the vocalist in Liberez at that time, and she was just this the person I'd been looking for for a long time, and she had she was completely naive when it came to making music, and also completely fearless as well. And but she had lots of ideas, non-musical ideas, just ideas on life and expressing yourself, and that I was just taking in this stuff, and we were kind of putting it together, and that's kind of how we came up with the sound for what became the first Liberez record.
Yeah, because there's like a lineup shift as well, isn't there? There's like two sort of eras of Liberez so far. Then there's like the early on starting off in the 2000s, and then like the past 10 years when you kind of get a firmer plan.
Yeah, the first lineup of the band was basically the same as Woe. And it was just friends of ours that lived locally, and I love playing with people who are just open-minded. I've always approached music, playing with other people, of who's around, because I'm not searching for, I want this specific instrument, or I want this person to do this, or a person who can play that. We'll work within what we can do, rather than worrying about what we can't. What are the things that work, and what are the attributes that are kind of particularly work well between these the four people in the room, or whoever it happens to be. So we had quite a few years of experimentation with the guys that were originally in Woe, and I don't think they'd mind me saying that they weren't sitting down and digesting some of the music that me and Peter, the drummer, who we kind of did it together, were. But but I love where they sort of come from. But they got bored, saxophonist and the bass player, just through playing, traveling a long way to play to no one, and after a while kind of loses its appeal. I mean, I quite happily do that forever, and I've become much more mindful of that now. When I work with people, I try to really remember that if people donate their time to what you're doing creatively, that's a really generous thing, and you have to respect that and try and make it as painless and and rewarding as possible, and that can be quite difficult to do with limited money, but you go out of your way as much as you can. Maybe I wasn't as mindful of that at the time, and people just get annoyed and just think they don't want to do it anymore. We met Nina, and also Tom Scott. I don't know if you know him. So after this sort of several years of sort of knocking around on our own, going to sort of discovering some of the sort of free music scene in London, and just going to see all kinds of things. Through the studio, met James Blackshaw and Luke Younger, and the little scene that suddenly cropped up in Dalston in the early 2000s sort of centered around Barden's Boudoir. I don't know if you've heard of that venue.
I haven't, no.
Okay, so it was this sort of underground sort of basement place that I forget how it all came about, but so all these kids 10 years younger than me all started sort of gravitating towards this venue, and just loads of really creative, exciting people. And suddenly I just felt that vibe that I'd felt when I first got into the hardcore scene, where I was just really energized by all these people and the music they were making. And there was just bands just forming like every other week, and they'd probably last, 2 or 3 weeks. And that became, early on, I was like, I want to record this music, and the only way I'm going to get to do it is if I actually just force myself, or, kind of just say, come to the studio, I'll record you for nothing, just because I want to work with this kind of thing. Because this is, the music I'm interested in, not really lots of the bands that I was recording. So a band called The Lights Alive, which was James Blackshaw. I don't know if you know him. He's sort of became quite a famous guitarist, actually, sort of later on in sort of later 2000s. Luke Younger, who does Helm and runs Alter Records. Tom Hurst, who went on to do Designer Wave. But basically, this one band who, they came to the studio, and again, that was like this really important thing that I did, and opened the door to still what I'm doing now. And Tom was part of that. Yeah. So he, there was this little, so Barden's is on Kingsland Road, was on Kingsland Road, and behind it, in this sort of not strictly legal kind of setting, there was these kind of, I think they were kind of more like industrial purpose, like housing, or well, not housing units, and these people had sort of converted them, and lots of people were living there. Rory, who was in Test Icicles at that point, and all these different kinds of musicians who I'm all friends with today, all sort of like lived in this like one space. And Tom was one of them. He came to the studio in a band, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he really loves like Morton Feldman, and Tom is just one of these people that his personality is the music he makes. He's just operates on a much slower, considered, thoughtful level on everything. How he talks, how he thinks is like the complete opposite to me, and I really admire it, because he makes the kind of music that I could just never do, because my brain would just be going through too many thought processes in the time that he plays two notes, And so we kind of, I was just really into what he was doing. And then he got to a point in living in London where it just wasn't working for him, and he just needed to get out. So I said, why don't you come and live in Southend? Like it's much cheaper living down here, and I'm sure you can get a job or something. So he moved to Southend. We started to live in together, and him and Nina were these two personalities that had these, kind of attributes that are just very foreign to me, but that I really, really admired, and just wanted to kind of bring it all in as some weird kind of melting pot and see what we came up with. So yeah, that's how I got to meet Tom.
What's the current or the present lineups or ideas? Well,
Tom again kind of had the sort of deep calling to go back where he's come from, in Barrow, and a few things happened in his life where he sort of needed to be back home for a while, sort of family related, and then he kind of just remained there, and he set up his own record label, and he's making his own music, and has made many brilliant records. So we became a three piece. And then Pete and Nina ended up getting married and having starting a family, and they've moved to the country. So I had to start again, and I wasn't the idea for Liberez it wasn't done in my mind. I still knew I had more music I wanted to make, and I was just really fortunate that I'm in the position where, because I've been running a recording studio for so long now, that you encounter lots of all the time really, really talented people, and I started sort of mentally going through this sort of directory in my brain of like the people that I'd worked with. One of them straight away I knew if I ever had to find a percussionist or someone like that again, who I would ask, and the guy that I play with now, Matthew, and a guy from the Basque country called Inigo, who'd made a record with me off the back of me recording James Blackshaw. He was someone also that I knew that if I wanted to at least ask and see if he'd be interested. And I was just really lucky that both of them said yes. And then Sylvia was a friend of a friend. I was really interested just in a sort of nuts and bolts style way of constructing rhythm, interested in flamenco and like the sort of 12/8 structures of that. But again, it's you have to, it was no point trying to recreate what we'd done with the other people, because that was so based on their personalities and their particular ways of, operating. We had to, it was quite a long process to sort of, create something new, and still is, we're still in that phase.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, one thing I kind of maybe missed is the band you've done. I guess this is around the mid-90s is Sterling, which is like,
okay.
I was surprised. There's last year it was a 7-inch, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah, as was I as well. So
okay.
yeah. So
archives.
Yeah, so like, it's weird, isn't it? None of our lives quite follow the sort of, you sort of create this narrative of what you think happened, and then you go back of it and you're like, oh yeah, but I was doing that as well. I was doing all that at the same time I was doing Understand. We were like, how stripped down and stupid can we make this?
Yeah.
And it seemed like for me, it was a great antidote to how precious and kind of, I don't know, corporate Understand had become at that point, compared to where we'd started off. I've always had, I love things to be like raw, and the opposite. I kind of, I've got, quite a wide palette of things that attract me. So how that band happened was Pete, who I mentioned earlier, was my long-term collaborator in Liberez and Woe. He's a couple of years older than me and has this sort of, when I met him in the early 90s, had what seemed like this encyclopedic knowledge of the history of, certainly American and, Western guitar music. And he also he started talking about like garage punk, and I was like, what do you mean? What is that? And he's like, like garage punk from the 1960s. And we're like, no idea what you're talking about. So it became this sort of, part of a long education of being friends with him. And he would sort of introduce you to all different things. It just seemed like every week he was saying, do you know about this? Do you know about that? And then his friend, Sam Nee. Sam at the time had been living in San Francisco, and he was like friends with the Mummies, and he was in this band out there called Marzipan. He'd come back to the UK, and Pete and Sam were long childhood friends from like primary school, and they both got into like the Cramps and together, and then got into like this sort of that 80s revival kind of garage punk thing, and all the bands and the sounds they were referencing to me were just, I had no idea what they were talking about, but I was like, yeah, I want to do something like this. So Understand at that point had a regular rehearsal room, which was just paid for monthly. We would just go there all the time, pretty much every day. If we didn't have a gig, we'd just go down there and rehearse. So we had a space, and so I said to Pete and Sam, I said, let's do it. This music you're talking about, let's do it. Why don't we give it a go? They can play primitive music because they, certainly at that point, play primitively. They had, quite a simple skill set, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And so they were, I was trying to dumb down, if you like, whereas they were playing as they do. And, and there's a lot of power in that, Anyway, so Pete had some old equipment, like had this great old amplifier and an old sort of 60s drum kit. Sometimes you need the gear to get the sound, if you like. And he had this old, what are those? Tone bender pedal as well. Oh no, so Sam had the tone bender pedal, just this pedal you stick on, and you just like didn't really have to do anything else. It just kind of did it all for you. And we just started rehearsing. But what we did, which would have been the complete opposite idea of Understand, because there was a 4-track machine there, I think, at the time. We'd get a rehearsal. Sam would say, I've come up with these lyrics on the train. They were ridiculously moronic lyrics. and we just, as soon as you played it once, you just record it there and then.
Yeah.
So we made quite a lot of recordings. I think there's like, 35 songs or something that we recorded over the, we played a handful of gigs as well. And, it was like, it was no different to doing Standoff. It was just like a side thing. I found it really, really enjoyable. And I loved hanging out, these slightly older, more knowledgeable guys, but also that had this sort of primitive take on how to do music, that was like very alien to me. Yeah. And I think we did it for a couple, maybe 3 years, 3 or 4 years, forgot all about it. And then actually my friend Mark Morgan, he said, "You didn't tell me about this." And it was like the record, of the Sterling stuff. And I was like, well, I had no idea. This is the first I've ever heard about it. So yeah, it was sort of quite a pleasant surprise that suddenly made it out there, if you like.
So, I don't know, this is just another example of things coming full circle to, 30 years ago again, I suppose. It's like probably it's strange, isn't it? It's just kind of normal at this point, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the passage of time can throw a different light on things, can't it? Something that I love doing it then, and it was. I think we thought, oh yeah, this is quite cool, some of this stuff, but I don't really remember playing it to many people or really going on about it. We did, like I said, a handful of gigs, but the passage of time, and you listen back and you're like, oh, okay, I think. Yeah, maybe it's good that it's come out now rather than at the time. There was a few comments like from the other people involved, like, kind of like almost begrudgingly, oh yeah, no one got it at the time. And I'm like, I'm not sure it was that no one got it. I think it's more, just sometimes things are more interesting as the focus has shifted, like you see it through this different prism, and it sort of it takes on like a new meaning or something.